Hello.
Hi there,
Everyone
Dr.
able to
Wolfe.
hear
You're
me?
on the air. Yep.
Good afternoon or good morning, again, depending on your time zone. And it's a pleasure for me to be here to present this webinar. This is my first webinar, so I hope you'll be attentive and wish me success. This is me. I am the coordinator of outreach programs for the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies at Ball State University. I'm the former director of that center. I'm also chair of an organization called the Muncie Interfaith Fellowship. And that's an interfaith dialogue organization, which I'll be talking about a little later. I thought I'd talk first about my spiritual journey a little bit, I guess. I was trained to conduct interfaith dialogue and became interested in interfaith activities through an organization in Michigan called the Lakeshore Interfaith Institute, and I also attended Wolfe Seminary International in New York City. I guess my interest in interfaith work began during my first trip to India back in 1991, and I went there actually to study Hindustani music. I'm a musician also. My position at Ball State University is also a professor of the music department, and I'm a classical saxophonist. But when I went to India to study Hindustani music, I became very interested in the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, and also found that Indian music is very much integrated with religion and mathematics and philosophy and dance, and it's taught in a very holistic way. And so that's what triggered my interest in interfaith dialogue and in peace studies. I have two poll questions, which now perhaps I can get the results from, and you will see them on your screen here. I'm assuming you've already been asked these questions. So,
Yes, the poll questions are now live on your screen. You can go ahead and answer by clicking the option. And as soon as we have most of the results in, I'll go ahead and read those results aloud to the presenter. Please respond now.
I'm just interested in finding out the kind of audience that I am addressing and what your preferences are in terms of spiritual or religious tradition. And also if you have borrowed ideas from other religious traditions or philosophical systems that you have brought back to and found helpful in guiding your life.
Okay, the results from the first poll are in. 50% of the respondents said that they identify with a specific religious tradition. 29% said no specific religion but consider themselves spiritual. No one responded saying that they practice a form of earth-based religion. And then 14% refer to themselves as secular humanist or agnostic. And no one responded as atheist, non-believer.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question?
Okay, the second question is now live on your screen. It's a yes/no question. Please respond now. Okay, the results are now in. It looks like the response was 85% yes and 15% no.
Very good. Thank you very much. I have personally found it very helpful, and apparently many of you also have found it helpful to be exposed to other religious traditions and to get a perspective on a particular theme that you can then bring back to your own tradition and apply it to your life or help you think more deeply. And that is really the whole purpose of being exposed to various religious and philosophical systems, is how they can help you think more deeply about those enduring philosophical, theological questions that are so important to life. Well, from this webinar, I have the following objectives. So when you're finished with the webinar, you should, one, be familiar with guidelines as to how to prepare and conduct an interfaith program or event. Two, be familiar with the concept of separation of church and state as it applies to a public university or a college campus. Three, have a general understanding of 4 categories of spiritual growth. And 4, be familiar with ways to bring together believers and non-believers.
Dr. Wolfe, I'm going to interrupt for just a moment. It looks like we're not able to see the current screen. It may be frozen, so I'm going to actually restart your screen sharing to make sure that we are seeing the most current version of what you're showing us. So please go ahead and click the pop-up window that came right now.
Yes.
We'll see if that helped. There we go. Got it. Thank you.
The webinar objectives, yes. So I just went over those, and so I assume I don't need to repeat those, but those are the objectives for today's webinar. So peace building is in the title, and I think the first thing we have to do is define what peace building is. And in peace studies, we generally define it as action that seeks to develop collaborative relationships based on mutual trust and cooperation. And also it's action that serves as a positive deterrent to violence. You know, if you have a relationship that is based on a cooperative, mutual, symbiotic relationship, that is to say both of you are benefiting from the relationship, then that creates an environment where you don't want to offend the other person because you don't want to jeopardize that productive, cooperative, collaborative relationship. And that's what peace building strives to do. And it also serves as a deterrent from negative behavior because you don't want, again, you don't want to jeopardize the positive relationship that you have. And so that's really what we see when we enter into a peace building effort. What we find from this is that peace is a process. It's a process which needs to be sustained, which needs to be invested in. We have 4 definitions for peace in peace studies. The first is personal peace, and that is feeling centered within oneself, inner contentment, being true to one's values. Secondly, there's negative peace, the absence of violence. And this is not a very fulfilling state. An example of negative peace between nations would be the United States and Russia during the Cold War era in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, early 80s. There was not much cooperation between the two. There was animosity. There was a fear of one another. That gave rise to a nuclear arms race, which was both expensive and dangerous. And so that's an example of a situation of negative peace between nations. And negative peace between individuals would be such that you're not really interacting with one another. You're just sort of tolerating one another and not getting beyond that. But what we seek is positive peace. Positive peace is characterized by collaborative relationships built on mutual trust and cooperation. And there's also the category of proactive peace, and that seeks to actively maintain the condition of positive peace. Because peace is a relationship that needs to be sustained. Peace is an unfolding process, not a static condition. And we should think of peace as a verb, not a noun. Think of peace as a process that you invest in. It's sustaining a relationship that's extremely important. Now, we also have definitions for violence, of course. 3 definitions. Physical violence, which is everybody is most familiar with because it's self-explanatory. Action intended to cause physical or material harm. But there's also psychological violence, and this is what we refer to as intimidation, emotional hostility, threats, name-calling, bullying, verbal abuse, offensive rhetoric, and forms of passive aggression. Unfortunately, today, in the domain of religion and belief systems, we often have hostile rhetoric coming from the extremes of those traditions. That is to say, if you have an extreme atheist position another person in an extreme literalist or fundamentalist religious position, oftentimes you find hostile rhetoric going on between those two, and that's very counterproductive. And so what I'm trying to do today is provide a means through which we can have constructive dialogue and not be drawn into negative, counterproductive, offensive rhetoric. But then there's also structural violence. Structural violence occurs when a political, social, or economic structure disenfranchises a certain group of people by depriving them of their basic needs or denying them equal opportunity. This includes any form of discrimination. Basically, structural violence is the violence of oppression. And as Mahatma Gandhi said, poverty is perhaps the worst kind of violence. So which form of violence is most difficult to control? And the answer is actually psychological violence. Now, that surprises most people. In the United States, for example, we have laws against physical violence and structural violence. If I assault you physically, I can be arrested, I can go to jail. We have laws against discrimination to minimize structural violence. But psychological violence is often protected by free speech. And so we have to think carefully about our rhetoric, about how we speak. Practicing nonviolence means abstaining from all three forms of violence. We must respect the human dignity of all people and show reverence for life. So here are some suggested formats for educational interfaith programs. The first option would be to focus on one specific wisdom tradition and explore it with someone who lives according to that tradition. And it's important when you do that you do find someone not only that's a practitioner, but also is well informed about their tradition and represents it well, is knowledgeable about it. I find a lot of people that are practitioners and are enthusiastic about their tradition, but they haven't been studying it deeply enough to have the kind of knowledge that you might want that person to have. So you have to be careful on who you ask to make sure that religion is represented properly. Second option, and this is the option that I like the best and that I recommend, and that is choose a theme that the wisdom traditions share and ask someone from each tradition to speak on how their religion addresses that particular theme. And when this happens, it becomes a very enlightening experience. You choose a theme, for example, choose the theme of prayer, for example, or meditation, and how each different tradition views that particular theme. I'm going to give you a list of themes, common themes, themes that are shared in common by the religious traditions later on. And it's very enlightening to have a dialogue meeting where people are speaking to that particular theme or topic from their own tradition. The third option is have the event include food, music, dance, or art from multiple religious traditions. This approach tends to attract a much larger audience and may make your presentation more, your program more effective. There are certain guidelines we have for interfaith dialogue, and as I already have mentioned, the first one is choose presenters that are both practitioners of our faith and who also are knowledgeable about their wisdom tradition. Second, speak in terms of what you believe in, not what you do not believe in. This is perhaps the most important of all these points here. When you speak in terms of what you believe in, it keeps the topic and the rhetoric in the positive. But if you speak in terms of what you do not believe in, there is a risk you may offend someone who's from another tradition in the audience. And it's very good to ask people to really examine their own faith tradition based on what they believe in and speak of it in the positive and strive not to enter into a negative expression of their faith. So number two, I think, is the most important. Number three, understand that faith is not blind acceptance. Rather, it means to trust. We have faith in that in which we place our trust. Faith is also compatible with reason in that it is through reason and experience that we determine what we can trust or have faith in. I like to use as an analogy or a metaphor for this, to illustrate this, is the concept of marriage. If you are going to marry someone, you don't marry that person based on blind faith. That is to say, you don't marry someone that you simply don't know. You have experience with that person, and you learn to trust that person based on how you know them, how you know their personality, where they come from, and so forth, what their background has been. But there's also, of course, the future involved in a marriage. You don't know exactly what's going to happen in 10 years. You don't know what that person is going to be like in 10 years. But you have faith based on your experience with that person. You reason that you feel that you will be able to continue to trust that person and grow with that person. So that's an illustration of how we use both reason and trust together. So faith and reason are not opposed to one another. I think what a lot of people are reacting against today is the concept of blind faith. And religious traditions really speak against blind faith. It's important to understand that there's a great deal of misunderstanding when it comes to how faith is defined. People often just assume it means blind acceptance, when in fact it is a form of trust, and it's a trust that we develop based on experience and learning. 4, respect the spiritual experience of everyone. Their journey is as meaningful to them as yours has been to you. And number 5, and this is another important one, set a time limit for each person asked to speak. I find by experience that when people have the opportunity to speak about their religious tradition, it's a cherished set of beliefs that they have, and they tend to want to talk on and on. So you may want to make sure that you give a time limit and ask everybody to please observe that. Otherwise, your meeting will go on way too long. Here are some examples of core values that are shared among the great religious traditions. All the religious traditions embrace some form of the golden rule. You can go to some websites and you'll get statements of the golden rule from 12, 13, 14 different religious traditions, different ways of saying the same rule, same truth. Each associate light with God, divinity, or wisdom, and darkness with ignorance or losing one's way. Each tradition emphasizes forgiveness and has some form of penitential practice or season. Each encourages a form of reflective prayer or meditation. Each teaches that a person should disengage the ego and act from a level free from self-centered interests. And each religion calls upon its followers to share their wealth and help people in need. Here are some examples of the great religions equating God or wisdom with light. From the Christian tradition, it says, God is light in whom there is no darkness. From the Islamic tradition, God is the light of the heavens and the earth. From the Jewish tradition, the Lord is my light and my salvation. From the Sikh tradition, God, being truth, is the one light of all. And from the Hindu tradition, the world of Brahman is light itself. And Brahman in the Hindu tradition is the word used for the ultimate reality. Examples of references to a person's higher spiritual or altruistic nature. From the Jewish tradition, humans are created in God's image. From the Hindu tradition, everyone has the spark or light of divinity within them. From the Christian tradition, humans are called to discover and follow their inner light. From the Buddhist tradition, everyone has Buddha nature. From the secular humanist tradition, we have the capacity to choose selfless service over our egocentric motivations. Well, here is a picture of 2 women from Muncie, Indiana, and it's a remarkable picture and a remarkable event that I'm going to be talking about. The person on the left is from the Jewish tradition. She's a member of the Jewish Temple, Reformed Temple in Muncie, Indiana. Person on the right is from the Islamic Center. She is from Afghanistan. And these two women have become best of friends. They got together about 5 years ago, and they said, why don't we get together and have a dinner, a carry-in dinner, between our two congregations and get to know each other and build friendships. And this is peace building in action, Jewish and Muslim carry-in dinner, which happens annually here in Muncie, Indiana. And in the last couple of years, they've broadened it to include other traditions as well. 2 years ago, it was held at the Unitarian Church in Muncie, and over 125 people came, and we had all the religious traditions represented. And last year, it was held at the Jewish Temple. Here are some pictures of the dinner from last year's event. They chose a theme, a common theme to address and to be spoken about at this particular dinner. And the theme they chose was service to the community, or service to the world. And so someone got up from the Islamic tradition and spoke on how service to humanity is addressed in Islam. Someone came up from the Jewish tradition and did the same thing, and then I spoke on service from the Christian tradition. And our local paper has been very supportive of us as we have developed interfaith fellowship over the past 12 years. And we've been getting articles in the paper. This is an article I wrote which was inspired by one of the interfaith dinners we had, carry-in dinners we had a couple of years ago. And it's nice to have the support of the local paper, the Muncie Star Press. They are very sensitive to the need of building positive relationships between the faith communities within Muncie. It's always good to connect with an interfaith organization on a national level, and there are organizations that you can become a member of or become affiliated with, and they have websites where you find resources and ideas that you can use to create your particular programs. And one is the United Religions Initiative. Another is Interfaith Power and Light, which focuses on the environment. And another is the Center for Interfaith Cooperation. Muncie Interfaith Fellowship is a cooperation circle within the United Religions Initiative. And to form a cooperation circle within that organization, you need 7 people, and you need 3 different faith traditions represented. And so that's one particular organization which I can recommend, but of course there are others. If you just Google interfaith organizations, you'll find quite a few to choose from. Here is examples of shared themes that serve as topics for discussion. Prayer and meditation, humility, service, welcoming the guest or stranger, forgiveness, pilgrimage, religious calendars, metaphors of light and darkness, peace, that is inner peace and living at peace with the world, different versions of the Golden Rule, as I've already mentioned, tithing, what constitutes sacred space, ceremonial rites of passage, stories that contain a moral or philosophical teaching from each tradition, honoring a person who has died. These are just a few of themes that we have found successful in getting people together to speak on, and it's very enlightening to hear the views come from each tradition. What we are really wanting to do is move beyond tolerance to acceptance and appreciation. If you're in a state of tolerance, that simply means you're just sort of living in the same community but aren't really interacting. It's a kind of negative piece. And if tolerance breaks down, all you have left to go to is intolerance. So we want to move beyond tolerance to acceptance and then eventually to appreciation. And to get to the point where we are in a state of appreciation, that means we've learned about the other religious traditions. We're able to extract meaning from them and actually bring them back to our own tradition. But it's possible to appreciate another religious tradition without converting to it. This is the yin and yang symbol, which I like to use as an illustration of a cooperative, mutually beneficial relationship. You have these teardrops which are in a state of give and take. They imply a motion of give and take within the eternity of a circle. And the dark side represents intuition and the feminine aspect of nature, and the insightful faculties. The light side represents masculine and intellect, and the two need to be balanced and work in cooperation. I think the purpose of many religious traditions is to awaken us to those faculties of insight, faculties of realization and intuition, and so enable them to bring them in balance with what we mostly emphasize in the culture, and that is the intellect and the faculties of reason. So having the two in balance and in a mutual state of give and take is beautifully represented, I think, in this symbol. There are actually 4 categories of believers that I like to call. I've made these categories. There are many ways of looking at faith and stages of faith, and there's a book on the stages of faith which I'll recommend later. But I like to think of them in 4 categories, and the first is the fundamentalist category, and that is they accept their scripture as literally and historically true, and they tend to think dualistically in terms of right and wrong and so forth, right views and wrong views. Then there's the interpretive believer, and this is a person who's open to interpreting scripture as speaking in parables, symbols, metaphors, or myths. Now, the person in the interpretive category would, for example, look at the Garden of Eden story and the fall of Adam and Eve, not as a literal historical truth, but they would look at it as a myth, but which has deep meaning, meaning in terms of how you must live with integrity and so forth. So there's the interpretive person is able to appreciate symbols and metaphors. The abstract category is a person who views God as beyond name, form, and definition. God, for example, is analogous to light, spirit, wisdom, or selfless love, is moving to a more abstract view of the deity. And then the universal category of people who are comfortable with paradox and mystery and have resolved dualisms such as faith and reason, science versus religion, belief versus deeds. Now, of the categories of believers, the fundamentalist believers tend not to be ready for interfaith experiences. For them, the answers are more important than the questions. But for interpretive, abstract, or universal believers, they tend to see religion as helping a person think more deeply about enduring philosophical and theological questions. For them, the questions are more important than the answers. So I've covered a fair amount right now, and I thought I'd take a moment to see if there are any questions before I move on further. We've covered peace building, formats or guidelines for designing programs, and shared themes. So if anybody has any questions on the material so far, why, please feel free to type them in.
So far, no questions have come in, but if anyone does want to ask a question, please feel free to type it in the chat box, and we will receive those, and Joe will be able to relay those to our presenter.
Since no questions have come in, I think I'll move on, but if they do come in, feel free to interrupt me, and I will take the questions as they come. As far as the separation of church and state, some people wonder to what degree can we have programs that teach about religion, and are we in jeopardy of being criticized for violating the separation of church and state and the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Well, the Supreme Court has ruled that we are not in violation as long as the program, first, does not favor one religion or secular tradition over another, and second, provides the opportunity for all traditions, religions, and religious and secular to be represented. And it's important to understand the concept of provides opportunity, because we know that you may not have all religions and secular traditions represented on your campus. But the important thing is that you are open and you provide the opportunity for those traditions, if they are present, to be there, and if they choose to be a part of the program. So as long as you're fulfilling these two requirements, then you really are in line with the traditional Supreme Court ruling about the separation of church and state. Some people ask, how do you bring together believers and non-believers? Believers and non-believers can be brought together using any one of the following three discussion topics. At least this is what I found to be successful. First, understanding the concept of mystery and science and contemplative spirituality. Secondly, meditation or contemplative practice is a means of bringing believers and non-believers together, because certain forms of meditation do not require the belief in a deity and have been shown to have many health benefits related to the release of stress. Another topic or way to bring them together, and this is perhaps a little bit more esoteric, but delving into post-Newtonian science, interpretations of quantum physics, relativity, and the uncertainty principle. And a fourth way is focusing on social justice issues, community service, improving the environment, and so forth. The concept of mystery in science is fascinating to me. Astronomer Carl Sagan, who became well known in the 1980s, spoke of the cosmos much like the sages describe God or ultimate reality. Consider these words taken from his PBS series entitled Cosmos. He says that the size of the age of the cosmos is, quote, between immensity and eternity, close quote. He said the universe is, quote, rich with mystery, full beyond measure of delicate truths and exquisite interrelationships. And he says even in our present-day limited knowledge, even with our present-day limited knowledge of the cosmos, we know we are approaching the grandest of mysteries. Now compare this with the way a Christian contemplative, who's become quite well known, his name is Father Thomas Keating, he speaks of God as ultimate mystery, and he uses the following words, and sound very much like Carl Sagan's. He says, all who seek to participate in the experience of ultimate mystery, that is, the meaning of the reality underlying the cosmos through the practice of religion, love of nature, science, art, dedicated service of others, deep friendship, are united in the same fundamental search. They can remain in their own chosen path or religious tradition and still contribute to the unprecedented awakening of transcultural values that have begun to take place throughout the world. The most significant contribution they can make is to cultivate the experience of oneness with ultimate mystery, oneness with all other human beings, and oneness with the cosmos. So you have Carl Sagan, an astronomer who identified himself as being an atheist, and Father Thomas Keating, who's a Christian contemplative, using the same kind of language to describe the goal of their search. Here's something Dr. Sagan said of the relationship between science and spirituality. He says, science is not only compatible with spirituality, it is a profound source of spirituality. When we recognize our place in the immensity of light years and in the passage of ages, when we grasp the intricacy, beauty, and subtlety of life, then that soaring feeling, that sense of elation and humility combined is surely spiritual. So are our emotions in the presence of great art or great music or literature, or acts of exemplary selfless courage, such as those of Mohandas Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. The notion that science and spirituality are somehow mutually exclusive does a disservice to both. And that's from Carl Sagan's The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. Another person who's written a great deal about mystery from a Christian contemplative point of view is Father Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan friar. He said one of religion's main tasks was to give us that eye for paradox and mystery. And I highly recommend his book, The Naked Now, which is available and was published in 2009. But a lot of it deals with symbolism, metaphor, and how to look at Scripture and appreciate the paradox and see religion and spiritual growth as a means of thinking more deeply. The Islamic poet, Sufi, said the real work of religion is permanent astonishment. That's a quote I like very much. I get that experience. I was out to California this past August, and I went to Sequoia National Park, and walking amidst those giant sequoia trees gave me an experience of astonishment. And I get a similar type of experience when I see the magnificent pictures of the universe that have come back from the Hubble Space Telescope. There is a definition of mystery which includes that which is incomprehensible. Mystery isn't only something which we don't know, but it's also something which we do know, but once we find out about it, we realize it is incomprehensible. It is beyond the human mind, fully fathomed. And once you have that experience, you're really entering the spiritual domain. I think that is the goal of religion. Is one of the goals of religion is to help us appreciate that particular kind of experience. Here are some recommended readings. James Fowler wrote an excellent book entitled The Psychology, Stages of Faith, The Psychology of Human Development and the Quest for Meaning. And there's a website you can go to where there's a chart that goes through his 6 stages of faith. And it's a very constructive way of looking at different faith traditions and phases the person goes through. Herbert Benson is a medical doctor that wrote a book called The Relaxation Response. He investigated meditations, various forms of meditation, and found the health benefits which included lowering blood pressure and so forth, and releasing, facilitating the process of releasing stress. So that's a book I recommend, and again, bringing people together around the subject of the contemplative meditative experience is one important way of structuring a program. And then Chris Hedges wrote a book called When Atheism Becomes Religion, and he's trying to point out that a lot of times atheism is a reaction against extreme fundamentalism, and so that book is one I can recommend to you as well. Some more websites. The United Religions Initiative I already mentioned, Interfaith Power and Light, Interfaith Alliance, Center for Interfaith Cooperation, and the Interfaith Youth Corps that may be of particular interest, particularly to those of you who work on a college campus. So, time for more questions on peace building, or the formats and guidelines, designing programs, shared themes, categories of believers, and so forth.
So the first question I've got comes from Holly, and she's asking, going back a little bit, she wanted you to speak a little bit more about defining what you mean by the two sides of the Yao, of the Tao Yin-Yang symbol, being feminine and masculine.
Okay. Well, let me go back to that slide then. Here it is. See, most Westerners look at the symbol and they say, oh, the black side or the dark side is evil and the light side is good. But that's not the Taoist interpretation. The Taoist interpretation is that the dark side symbolizes intuition, faculties of insight, realization, and feminine. And that the light side symbolizes the masculine and the intellect. Now, that's a kind of stereotypical way of looking at male and female, but I think what it shows is that the Tao concept of yin and yang is within us as well as outside us in nature. That is to say, it implies that we need to balance our feminine and masculine aspects. We need to balance intuition with intellect, insight with reason. And it also shows that in addition to being in this flexible state of give and take, it also shows that the dark dot is in the light side and the light dot is in the black side, which indicates that they really are interdependent, they're interconnected. So there is, you cannot interpret this dualistically. It's meant to be an integration of the two. Am I answering your question?
We'll see if she pops anything, any follow-up question back. The next question I had comes from, well, the question is, what strategies do you have to bring interfaith programs to institutions that are tied to a specific denomination?
Could you repeat that, please?
What strategies do you have to bring interfaith programs to institutions that are specifically tied to a denomination?
Oh, I see. Well, I guess it depends on how liberal the denomination is you're speaking about. But usually in a higher education environment, there is great openness, or at least openness to explore different faith traditions. I suppose if you emphasize common themes, then you're going to get a different perspective on values that are shared between religious traditions, and you're not really creating a situation where you're sort of pitting one religion against another. You're building a structure of commonality and of mutual support, and you can find plenty of examples where the perspective from one tradition and the perspective of another tradition, not only are they compatible, but they also bring deeper meaning and insight. They give us a new, fresh way to look at our own tradition. And so, if you make that argument, that's the way I would approach trying to convince administrators or people who might happen to be people who need to approve the program you're trying to offer. That would be the approach I would take. Take, for example, the concept of pilgrimage. You see, you have a pilgrimage being an activity, an action that's a part of each religious tradition. And I learned a great deal about pilgrimage from the Islamic tradition, and brought that back to my own particular pilgrimages when I go to retreat centers or visit a monastery, for example. One particular aspect of or prerequisite of going on a pilgrimage in the Islamic tradition is that you have all your worldly affairs in order and taken care of, so you don't have to worry about them. And then you can go away and you can release yourself of those kind of worries, concerns, and attachments, so you can focus entirely on your pilgrimage. And that idea can also be applied if you're going on a pilgrimage from a Christian tradition or within the Jewish tradition or whatever your background is, to put aside, to have those worldly affairs in order, put them aside so you can be one-pointed and focus entirely on the mission of your pilgrimage. So that's the way I would approach it, to show that common themes can actually enhance and bring about a greater appreciation of a concept in your chosen religious tradition.
Okay, and then we've had a request that if you could to speak a little bit about the Peace and Conflict Studies program at Ball State.
Well, we have a Peace Studies minor at Ball State, and the Peace Studies minor, we have about between 20 and 30 students in the Peace Studies minor. There's a core class, Introduction to Peace and Conflict Studies, which everybody must take. And then there are a variety of electives which a person can enroll in to complete their minor. In Peace Studies, there are various domains that you can direct your curriculum in. For example, if you are interested in international relations, then you would take courses that pertain more to political science and international relations. If you're in social work or in sociology, you take courses which pertain more to, for example, women's studies or courses in mediation, for example. If you're in counseling, you would take courses that pertain more to mediation and counseling. And if you are, for example, pre-seminary, you would take courses that would pertain more to the religious perspective. And all those tie into different directions that you could take the Peace Studies minor. We don't have a major in Peace Studies at Ball State, but we do have a Center for Peace and Conflict Studies, and that center is very active in getting grants and in holding programs, sponsoring programs, which bring people together from various traditions, and not just religious traditions, but related to social justice issues, for example. Again, the Center for, or the Muncie Interfaith Fellowship is an organization that is an outreach program of the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies. We also have a student organization called the Social Justice League, and that focuses more on social justice issues and has students involved in that kind of activism.
That is all the questions that we've had submitted up to this point.
Okay. Well, I recommend then that you go to some websites which might help you further your investigation in how to structure programs on your campus, interfaith programs. And also, if you have any questions, you can email me at Ball State University. My email address is wmwolfe@bsu.edu. Be very happy to answer any questions you might think of after we finish the seminar.
I did have two more questions.
Okay.
Pop up right here if you have time to answer them.
Sure.
Kim Roberts asks that you use the term "not ready" when referring to fundamentalists in interfaith dialogue.
Mm-hmm. How
do student affairs professionals begin that conversation, and should we even consider that?
Well, I think I meant that in the sense that if a student doesn't want to attend or feels uncomfortable in an interfaith setting, then we really probably shouldn't. We should understand that they may not be ready for that, and we shouldn't force them to or provoke them to take part necessarily. I think there's a certain group of people that are more ready to reach out and to investigate other ways of looking at their own tradition and other traditions, and that we should cater to those people. I think the fact that a lot of people in the poll identified themselves as spiritual indicates that the majority of students are really ready for interfaith dialogue and interfaith understanding, but I think there are some people that aren't quite ready for it, and that we should obviously make the program available and encourage them, but just understand that there are certain stages of growth that people need to go through, and sometimes you cannot rush those stages.
And then the last question from Roger Eaton is asking, he's asking where is the interfaith movement headed?
Where is the interfaith movement headed? Yeah, that's an interesting question. You know, my own personal view is that we don't want the interfaith movement to become another religion, because we already have plenty of religions. Whenever there's been a movement to try to unite people and bring people together, it's kind of always eventually wound up being another denomination or another religion, and that's not where I think it should go. I think what we're looking for is again moving from tolerance to not just acceptance but appreciation, and building positive peace relationships socially between communities. Carrying out and being an example for contributing to a community in a positive way, regardless of your religious tradition, and working together with people from other religious traditions to focus on the needs within a community. That's where I think it should go. I think we should also, I would like to see also people have greater and greater interfaith understanding and be able to enjoy the process of thinking more deeply and using ideas from various faith traditions to as a vehicle to think more deeply about those enduring life questions. So that's where I would like to see the interfaith movement move forward. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the interfaith movement today is simply exposing people to different religious traditions and not really making connections, not really sharing and gaining insights about themes that traditions share in common. And I think that is really unfortunate. I think we need to go beyond simply learning about another tradition and know what they believe in as opposed to what we believe in, but rather see how there's this underlying web of unity when it comes to core values, for example, when it comes to the symbols that are used to appreciate divinity or God or wisdom, and rules for living that we share, tithing, for example, helping the poor, setting aside self-centered interests so that we may work for the good of the whole of society. You know, those are the kind of discussions we need and conversations we need to have between faith traditions, and that's where I hope that the interfaith movement is headed.
All right, I believe that's all the questions we had for today and the conclusion of our webinar. So thank you, Dr. Wolfe, for your presentation. It was very interesting, and I think the folks that attended appreciate your time. As a reminder to everyone, we do have a copy of the audio and video from today's webinar that will be available afterwards. It'll be posted on our website, glucuho.org. If you click on the resources heading, it's listed under webinar archives, and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel there as well. If you have any questions, Dr. Wolfe did provide his email address earlier. Feel free to contact him. I want to thank you all again for attending today, and especially thanks to Dr. Wolfe for his wonderful presentation. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.